Welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings Here. Inmendham. Anyway, it's not Mendham anymore. Because things change and crap happens and you get old and it sucks. So, yeah, that's life. So always thinking about life in terms of watching it. You know, birds on wires and trees and things, and all this seeking going on, all these little critters seeking, and then all the insects all seeking with their little antennas and different seeking. And they're all seeking some satisfaction of some deprivation, some mechanism that makes them incomplete, and they have to go seek completion. And it won't last. Okay, so they'll find it now and then, have a lovely donut. Have a stroke and die. It just won't last, the gratification, and they'll have to go out seeking some more. And it's almost like thinking of terms of like a terrible employer that forces the employees to compete with each other, and so only if you're willing to give up your free time and give up this and work on Saturdays and work on Sundays and work on all holidays and work on, and whoever, the only one who wins, okay, the person who wins really loses because they gave away everything, and their life is shit. And that's sort of, nature's the worst employer ever, in the sense that it just kills, most applicants are fired. Because they're not productive enough, they're not strong enough, they're not this, they're not that, whatever the standard is, they're not tall enough, they're not lucky enough. And so, and it's just mass murder, simply, for the sake of extracting more productivity from the machines. And, the machines evolve and change physically. Now, we've broken all that, so we're out of that stupid game. With the invention of the condom and the invention of just the knowledge of, oh, if I have sex, we might make a baby, and therefore I just won't bother. So a lot of people have chosen the not bother strategy. Too dangerous. Not worth it. And so, yes, and so I'm sitting here explaining a philosophy that, a bunch of people have to keep redoing over and over again. So they get born, they die, they get born, they die, and, these memes end up being part of the culture, and we all leak a little bit into the culture, and, and it just slowly evolves into something. And so it's slowly evolved into a culture that isn't dominated by married couples anymore. It's, there's actually more people in some kind of separated condition, whether divorced or never married. It's, that's the more likely condition. And so we're changing, we're evolving socially, because somehow people keep being born and they keep finding those same patterns. They keep repeating those patterns of, oh, I get it, I don't really want to be, father's knows best, or Leave It to Beaver, or whatever. I don't want to play 1950s sitcom. I don't want to be Hazel. I don't want to live that life. I want something a little better than that. So, people are smart enough now, I guess, you could argue, are free enough from any idea that they have some obligation to the Inquisition, the Bible thumpers, to role play, grow a beard and put a burqa on the wife and, role play, for a god. We don't have to do any of that silly shit. And the facts is that, a substantial number of people grow up in the civilization and end up a bit pessimistic and a bit non-cooperative in playing life the way nature wants, or the way our previous cultures would have deemed appropriate. They're just rejecting those values and recognizing that I don't want to be a slave to being a man, or be a slave to some obligation to behave in a certain way called being human. I'll just figure it out for myself. Thank you. What the best life strategy is. So again, but it's still the game, and I'm in the game. I've spent an awful lot of time having to think about this stuff and then argue with people and fight off all the harassment you end up with, so I'm paying a price for it. So being productive in some cause, it doesn't make you a winner. Okay, yeah, you win for the cause, but you yourself don't win. So it's like that guy just got assassinated, and it's just it's disgusting that people think they have a right to win the argument by killing the messenger. And that's just so damn stupid. I mean, once you open that door and say it's okay to do this kind of horse shit, it just gets ugly really fast. And it's getting ugly really fast where, nobody can really think about doing any kind of public event. Fuck that. Too stupid. And so, all interactions will have to be synthetic, because you just can't, there's no way to protect yourself from the silly people who think they're going to decide the subject by cheating, it's just that. So all of that's quite horrible. What was the point, though? I wanted to make a specific point about the fact that, so the guy doesn't win, right? So he does his fighting for a cause. I think his cause is stupid. He's an asshole. He's a jerk, all that kind of crap. But the fact is, you devote your life to something, and then somebody decides to just ruin it, with a bullet. And it's, what the fuck is that? That's just bullshit. So anyway, so I could just argue that, the productive people aren't winners. So even though they're productive, they're great. They're fantastic. They go to the laboratory every day. It's like Newton or some scientist who spends their life devoted. There's an awful lot of work. Okay, a lot of thinking, and a lot of angst about how did that work? Why does that happen? I got to figure this out. So it's the same thing as scheming. They could spend their whole life chasing tail, trying to get the perfect trophy wife, and that would be scheming. Or they could scheme for some answer to a question, And that's what our brain has the capacity to do. It can be devoted to your silliest ambitions, or it can be devoted to your most profound ambitions, the ones your brain figures out as a good cause or good for humanity or all of that kind of crap. And, it's a decision your brain will make, whether you're going to be a trivial, selfish, useless turd, or whether you're going to attempt to do something constructive to help, put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I mean, you could be walking down the street and see broken Humpty, and you could say, oh, he's not worth putting back together again. Who cares about that shit? But what if Humpty is, a cure for cancer? And you just walked by and said, I'm not going to make any contribution. I'm not going to try to put it together and make it work. I'm not going to make any, I'm not going to contribute to anything that benefits society. I'm just going to contribute to things and be devoted to seeking my gratification. And but the trick is it still always has to be personal. So in a sense, the people who are motivated by some ego thing, some mechanism that says, what's the tradition of our people to be productive? So I must be productive. And so they're in the same kind of competition in the sense it's sort of selfish. I suppose I'm being selfish in attempting to do something nobody's done before, or, but really it's just a competition. You show up at any game and you're going to play the game, right? I mean, it's like they could put any video game in front of you and you'll learn how to play it and enjoy it, because it's a competition. I mean, whether you're trying to put a ball into a little hole or throw a basketball into a hoop or, spiral a football, it doesn't matter. It's all just a competition. It's about your ego, about your sense of accomplishment, conquering the task, and that's the motivation. But the point is that there are motivations, throwing a stupid football, or figuring out how cancer cells grow. So these are two different, the ends are completely different. The means is the same thing, ambition, but the ends are completely different. So anyway, so that's the power humans have. Now, none of the animals can do that. None of the animals can realize there's a thing called understanding, and it's very powerful, that you can understand how everything else works, and you don't have to be just reactive. You can actually understand how to unplug the bear, so to speak. You can figure out how to negate something's impact on you. You can wear a mask and not get a virus, that kind of stuff. You can mitigate against your environment by understanding it. Now, the animals can't do that, but we can. And like that, also, we can understand that there's this big picture of the welfare of the entire sentient community, and then there's your comfort. These are two different projects, and your actions, how you'll feel while you're doing it, the work it requires, is really going to be the same. So if you're going to be angsting over something, or compelled to compete, you might as well find a really good game to compete in. There's games where the competition can produce something of real value, and there's games where the competition produces nothing of any value. We can choose. So yes, obviously I have chosen, frankly, what I think are legitimate projects, which is understanding the value that we're playing for in the game of life, and then understanding the physics and the mechanics of the life itself. And those two projects, I would argue, were good choices, because they really get to the foundation of what the hell you want to know, what you need to know about the world. You don't need to know whether there was a Big Bang or not. You need to know, does suffering matter? Does it add up? Is there an equation that says you're sufficiently efficient and aligned somewhere where it's not worth it? Now, obviously, I'm arguing that when you do all the figuring and the calculating, none of it's worth it, because there's no way to create an actual positive value. All you can do is fix things that never should have been broken in the first place. All we can do is satisfy desires that never should have existed in the first place. They serve no function. They do nothing but compel us to scheme our way through an existence we're going to fail at anyway. We're going to be destroyed, and everything we acquire is knowledge and information and efficiency and efficient structure, wisdom, all of it. Crushed, killed, destroyed, just wiped out. And you have to just keep starting over from the beginning again, landing on Earth and having to learn all the life lessons all over again, blah, 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 blah. And you might have the benefit, of being able to watch an inmendham video and gain maybe some perspective, that'll be insightful in terms of understanding how you work and what's the context of your function, and understand that there's no boogeyman, and there's no Holy Ghost, and there's no gods, and there's no totem, there's no hobgoblins, there's no other mechanism controlling the strings. It's just physiology or biology, and then you have a calculator, and the calculator actually works. It's designed to be reasonable. It's designed to get the right answer. It's designed to figure out that you can't walk through a tree. It does the test, it figures it out, and it knows it can't do that. It's so it's designed to be smart, not stupid. It really is. You're designed to be able to smell almost stupid ideas or nonsense or woo or silliness or crazy fucktarded crap. Your brain can do that if you allow it to. But if what you're doing is looking for the truth you want to be true, the story you want to be true, you want gingerbread, you're horny for it, then you make up some silly story, to rationalize your existence because you like the story, not because the story has any evidence proving it or demonstrating it has anything to do with the truth. And so even that's an idea that's in people's head, is some idea that the truth matters, that facts matter. Getting them right is really important, because how you're going to interact with the world is based on that knowledge. If you think you can walk through trees, you're going to be in big trouble. You're going to have to take a lot of aspirin, and you get an ulcer and bleed to death. So that won't work. All right, so that's probably enough of a beginning. So I might actually do a little drawing, and just try to do a quick version of, the system, how the system got to the state that we're in, and the position we're in, and just how weird and strange it is. But it's just that it's just weird and strange because of how we react to something we can't completely understand. I mean, we can't put the whole thing in our head. It doesn't fit. It's too big a picture. And so we keep reacting to little pieces of the picture that you might see. But yes, we're just bugs. Okay, theoretically, there's not any difference. We haven't changed the game any. It's a mouth and anus and stealing energy from other organisms, and that's the game we're playing. And then we're playing it in this context of pretty pictures and pretend nice little costumes and eye makeup, and so we're making a mess out of we're playing a bad game badly, and we are smart enough to recognize it's a bad game, and if we're going to play it, we have to try to play it as well as possible, because there's something real at stake, which is this torture stuff that is really, really nasty. And if we can't do something about it, the high price being paid, too expensive, then we have no business being here. Because, we're basically just facilitators. We're enablers, because we have the capacity to do something and we don't do it. All right, enough of a beginning. Yeah. All right, back. Probably. So anyway, so I've been thinking, about the theme here of this video, which really isn't a theme. Just kind of pointing out that, this isn't all that complicated in terms of, I'm basically spending my time for the last 20 years, on two kinds of subjects, trying to explain the core meaning of value, the idea that if you were really to look at the universe, and then you start focusing on where you can find something that means something, you have to go to the surface of Earth, and you have to say, okay, there's something happening there because there's all of these experiences happening, and I've sampled the experiences, and I know they're substantially different in the category, and so you try to explain that there's this cavern of difference in terms of a value difference, and that's all the difference is. The distance is value, between the worst day and the best day, the worst feeling and the best feeling, and frankly, that's all you're playing for in life. And that it is quite irritating, because I wish somebody had made this video when I was a kid to explain that, your life is going to be this project you're going to be on. And it really does matter what you choose to do with your time. It's not all the same thing. There's hugely productive things to do and hugely socially destructive things to do. You can be part of some corporation, selling products that people don't need to people who can't afford them, some sort of bullshit. You can be a loan shark, you can be all kinds of different things, or you can be trying to cure, miseries that hurt people and cause them grief and sadness. You can try to keep banana peels from getting on sidewalks. You can do something to minimize the amount of pain and suffering on the planet, or you can do something to make it worse. And you sort of have to plan your life that way. And there was no big picture like that. It was always just some theme about how you're supposed to just obey some 10 Commandment thing, and your job is done. Don't rape anybody, and don't steal, and don't do this, and don't do all these negative things that are obviously negative. And somehow you've done your job, and it's not going to be that simple. And there's going to be a real trade-off between sometimes your benefit and the world's benefit or something. You know, you could argue these little cases where you almost can't imagine people having the amount of integrity they display, so the kind of war hero stuff. But the Chernobyl guys, you know, the ones who had to fly the helicopters to dump the concrete and do all that, these people all died. I mean, they all, you know, they were doomed. And they had the balls to go do it because they knew there was this big, huge, giant problem that needed a solution. Now, maybe some of them didn't know they were writing their, they were signing a ticket basically saying, I'm going to get killed by this job. But regardless, it's sort of a magnificent demonstration of a kind of integrity that, I wish I would hope I would have, but I know, that it's really asking a lot. And you're just saying, where did that come from? Because it doesn't really exist in there's no evidence of any social character like that. Everybody seems to be a schemer, and that anything they're doing that looks generous, they have their, hand reaching in, and, they're grafting off of their generosity. Their project really isn't about saving anybody. It's about pretense and pretending they're doing good, even though there isn't going to be any good done. So anyway, I'm just trying to get to the idea that, there's nothing especially complicated in terms of the basic equation. You're saying, well, how did it get to so messy in terms of something so obvious? So you have all these right-wing religious people, and they do generate all of this animosity in other people because they're just so arrogant and obnoxious, and they want to, force women back into the kitchen and do all this retarded stuff. And you're saying, what is the motivation? Why the hell are people gravitating to this notion that somehow everything was really great in the past, when you have a life expectancy of 35? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Why would you want to go backward? It's just impossible to understand why this investment in this silly fable of some god with a silly rules in heaven and all this nonsense, when the people here on earth can't even obey these simple rules. They obviously don't have any confidence in this creator thingy, because they're really easy to seduce out of their morality. It just it's such duplicity. So I mean, that's really ugly, and then the other part of it is that you see that when you give people the right to write the laws, they just write laws that are self-serving. Tax somebody else and give me the money. That's all. It just ends up being stupid and retarded, and fascist, and and it's just all really dumb. And you're just saying, it's just even the simple things like, I mean, I didn't need to figure out that I should have a right to die. I mean, it just seems quite obvious that if dying is messy, I should have a right to do it in a clean way. Why should I do it in a messy way if I can do it in a clean way? Why should I do it in a hurtful way when I can do it in a passive way? And, you don't need to have much, you don't have to have great logic skills, and you don't have to be incredibly informed. You don't need to know, what the, capital of Nigeria is to figure out that, why waste suffering? That would be really dumb. And it's the fact that you have to have that argument, that you actually have to sit here and argue with these morons that this is a pretty ugly statue or totem you're putting at God's altar. That you're basically saying, well, I'll torture people for our fable, our story, our silly beliefs. I'll take torture and I literally put it on the altar and say, look, I tortured people to to preserve the integrity of your creation, because these nasty people don't think you should be in charge of their death. They think they should be. That they should decide when to die instead of God deciding, or the microbe deciding. And let's understand, microbes decide. Okay, scarlet fever decides, a virus. There's no God making the decision. The virus was in the ground. They were going to step on that piece of ground. They were going to get the virus. That wasn't going to be preventable. They were on a ship stuck with somebody with scarlet fever. They were going to get scarlet fever. They're stuck there. They can't avoid it. It wasn't God's decision. Just like, why are these people believing any of that crap? I mean, it's just so stupid. And you're just like, oh, okay, that's what you got to fight. So, 80% of people are going to believe in these fables, these hobgoblins and these, gremlins and pixies and fairies and all kinds of silly crap. And you've got to waste your time, essentially, arguing something as simple as, well, let's not bother with any of that crap and just try to deal with the practical fact that we can make this voyage less unpleasant. We can put springs on the car and do certain things to make it work better. So why don't we just try to fix it and make it work better? Being alive. Make it easier. Make sure that people are educated. Make sure, why not? Why don't we do that? Why are we pretending that there's some better thing to do than, fix civilization and, in a sense, keep humans focused on the prize, which is preventing harm. I mean, there's no bigger prize you can win than be a big harm preventer, suffering preventer. I mean, yeah, okay, there's no Olympics for it, but the point is there's no better prize you can win in your life than saving people from pain and suffering. Shit. Yeah, and then that leads to the bigger contextual argument of, well, yeah, the simplest way to do that is just prevent humans from existing, because then they won't have any problems. Because really that's all your life is going to be, is trying to solve problems. As they come to attack you and tear you to pieces, you have to keep fighting it off with your different weapons and shields. And it's just a gladiator war, and you're going to end up doing a lot of stuff you end up eating fetuses eventually to protect yourself from your mortality. You're going to start vampiring the rest of the world and say, I need my comfort, and I need my medication, and I need this, and I need that, and I'm going to take it, regardless of what the price is that somebody else has to pay. So it's just, yeah, little words like fairness. That's another one. Like, as a kid, you figure out the concept of a fair fight, and you figure out something obvious like, well, we're gonna have a war, right? I'm gonna start a corporation. You're gonna have a corporation, and we're gonna decide to see who's the best at running a business. And then the catch is that you don't have to make any money for 3 years. So like Google, you can just sit there and burn your venture capital, all right, and lose millions of dollars a year. And the other business, though, can't lose billions of dollars a year. It has to make enough money to pay its employees and keep everything running, because it doesn't have a big, huge pile of venture capital to play with. And so, one business is at a huge disadvantage because it has to make money. So, and to make money, it's got to inconvenience customers by they having to pay for stuff. So it's just so obviously not a fair fight, right? I mean, it's just terrible capitalism in the sense it's not a visible hand. It's not picking it's not picking the person that ran the most efficient business. It's just picking the person who was able to outlast the other guy because he had more capital. I mean, it's just a silly reason for one guy to win over the other. And that's the world we've chosen, where that's still an okay tactic. So even though William Randolph Hearst made it as ugly and gross as possible in terms of demonstrating it, basically saying I can lose $1 million for 100 years, and so yeah, go ahead, try to compete with me. because you have to run your business where you can afford to lose $1 million a year. Can you afford to lose $1 million a year? And the simple answer is, of course not. So all of the competition has to just die, because it can't play with somebody who's giving away everything for free. When we know it's not for free, because eventually they're going to suck it for money. They're going to expect to get all their money back that they gave away before. The free stuff was never free. You're going to pay for it. And we're paying for it in the sense of Google ads and all the other spying and other nonsense that they market. All their data collection. It's all valuable information to manipulate you. Well, anyway, don't want to get into an argument about the whole economics thing, but I mean, it's not that complicated to figure out the difference between winning honorably, and cheating. And, you can do it with a horse race, right? I mean, all the horses are on the starting line, except one of them is halfway down the track. Yeah, okay. Well, you can figure out, well, that's not going to work. I mean, that's not going to be a fair contest. So anyway, and then you start thinking, because you gain a little maturity, and then you can start figuring out, well, look at all the disabled people and all this and all that. I mean, there's a lot of people that have these huge disadvantages that aren't their fault. They were in a car accident when they were 10 and they're paralyzed, some other thing. And, where's our effort to fare up the fight for them? Oh, we'll give them $50 a month. It just is pretty pitiful to realize, just how people just don't appreciate their advantages, and all of that goes to the whole thing of all the other countries that we've exploited the labor force in, to have a more comfortable life. And people talk about it being wrong, but we don't stop it. We don't do anything to prove that it's wrong, because it's pragmatically impossible. You can't undo the fact that cheaper is better. And so anyway, it's irresistible, sort of, just in any short-term calculation, it's irresistible. So anyway, I don't know where this is exactly going, but I'm just trying to say that, look, I wish somebody had told me that you have a life and your life is going to be either a mess and a disaster, or it's going to be something to admire as a well-played game. That you can play the game well or you can play the game badly, and just make it that simple. Instead of some ideas that you can be, you can obey all the rules and march with your uniform, which doesn't make any sense, because that's not winning. Complying to the idiotic rules that should never exist, the dress code or some other bullshit, isn't living a good life. But then again, the catch is that all of this is about competitiveness and how much you're going to invest in trying to secure your ambitions. Whatever you choose, whatever your brain decides to do, it finds compelling and interesting as a problem to solve. So I guess the irony is that women do this biological clock nonsense and pretend they need to have a kid, and part of that is just them needing to be needed. So they need, and it's, you can just see how vicariously they're living the life they wanted to live, in some kind of hope that that's what their daughter is going to do or something. And they just really have no clue, because they're just setting up for the same scenario, the same failure, and just another cycle of, somebody lost in a project that has little to no hope of succeeding. Yeah. I mean, there's so many arguments you could make, like if, Tiger Woods, if his father was obsessed with making him into a golfer. Well, what if he didn't get 6'3"? What if he was only 5'6"? All this stuff wouldn't have happened. So it's just the matter of the luck having so much to do with it, and all these other circumstances have to fall into place. And could have had some injury, could have had a ton of different things happen, and they didn't happen. All the ways the project could have failed. And so it's perceived as, look, it's that simple. Well, it's not that simple. And the world proves it because, millions of people think they're going to be, winners, CEOs, or Major League Baseball players, or some kind of thing. And, no, the odds are, tiny. The number of failures is, literally 1,000,000 times the number of successes. And nobody really adds that up and says, well, maybe this isn't a great idea. So I've ragged on that kind of social nonsense, the fact that our societies have created this false impression that these are the admirable things to do, hit home runs. And you're sort of wasting your time if you spend your time making yourself capable of curing a disease by getting a sufficient enough education to understand how to do it. That shouldn't be your project, to understand and successfully manipulate and control. No, you should do something silly, instead. It's so much more admirable, and it's just so backward, so upside down, that our culture can't even have enough integrity to be able to tell the difference between wasted energy and time and productive, potentially valuable things to try to be, so to speak. All right, so I guess that's part of the context. I guess the other part is that as a kid, part of it is that, yes, anybody doing that intelligent thing, there were all these nerdy prodigy types. So they're smart when they're 13, and then they get dumber and dumber, and by the time they're 30, they're a moron. So there's all this unevenness. Well, it's even how kids maturate, right? I mean, some kids grow really fast, some kids grow really slow, so there's no balance in what you can think you're capable of. So you can get the impression that you're not capable when, no, you were worth investing in. You just, you didn't know you'd end up 6 feet tall. Or you didn't know that all you needed to do was do a little bit more of this school thing, and you'd start catching on and figure out how to do this math or figure out how to do something. And it would become much more interesting to be a thinker than a stinker, right? That's from a Rocky movie, right? Be a thinker, not a stinker. Something like that anyway. Anyway, so, I was going to do, just sort of a diagram of the physics that's controlling us, and that, that's another context for understanding, is that there's no room in all of this, what the universe is doing mechanically, for any idea of a spirit or a soul or any kind of external vibrations or any of that crap that could be in any way significant or meaningful. You don't have any kind of X-ray vision that you don't know you have. There's no special functions, and it's just electrons and protons, and they decide everything else. They force atoms to be atoms. They force the atoms to combine with each other into molecules, and they force those to combine into compounds. And, they create DNA molecules, and then they create, these bigger machines. But it's all just a mechanical device. The atom isn't a mechanical device. You wouldn't really call it a machine, but it's a mechanical device because it has a structure, and it'll behave a certain way when it's hit with certain stuff, because it has a shape and properties and form, but it's all just made out of electrons and protons. Charge, magnets, you could argue. And yeah, once you understand that context, that's all that evolved, is, it goes from just simple piles to more complex piles to more complex piles, bigger and bigger piles in a sense. The atoms get bigger and bigger. And then the atoms do this thing where they combine with each other, so you have a little bit of extra complexification, and then you have the complexification of taking those and combining different atoms together, and and eventually you have this, and all this is this machine, just a pile of chemistry that's locked into configurations by form. Pieces of it say I only make liver cells, pieces of it say I only make whatever, pancreas cells, and each thing is just doing its little niche function, and you put all that together and you get this working system. But each part of the system gets simpler and simpler and simpler, and it's just a process. And so we're just a process, and it's just as a context, it just to think that everything I think, everything I do, everything in my brain, all of it, it's just electrons and protons. They have to do it first, way before I do it, in a way, in a sense. I mean, in terms of the number of interactions that take place for the single sentence spoken. The single word spoken is 1 billion interactions, and all of it happens there, okay, and somehow there doesn't have any notion of existing or being a consciousness or any of it. It's just a bunch of individual little processes obeying rules, and it just ends up being capable of being very, very complicated, but it's all very simple in the basic function. Anyway, it's just an argument against any of the wooey notions of gods and spirituality and purpose and creation or any of that kind of crap. It's just machines trying to survive. And they're not really trying to survive, they're just trying not to be dead. They're trying not to be hurt, which causes you to be dead. So it's just that simple. They're just looking to get comfortable and be comfortable and stay comfortable. And that's all you're doing. You're just trying to keep your pieces together. You're trying to keep your function without it breaking or degrading. And that's it. And the joke is you can't do it. You're not going to succeed. And all you can do is put it off and put it off. Die another day. And the days you'll have between then and now will just be the same kind of days where you have to get through the mediocrity and the tedious and the chores and the obligations and all the other crap you have to do that you don't find very interesting and you don't find very comfortable and you find kind of nauseating and tedious. Yeah, so you're not going to be having a great time while you wait to die. At least that's my experience. I don't wake up necessarily feeling like everything's just great and it's going to be another wonderful day. I don't try to be pessimistic. I mean, I don't try to dump on the day before it starts, but I just don't. I'm wary that with every day comes some new bullshit that might show up. And yeah, it's a little bit troubling, disturbing, angst-causing. It's not fun. Yeah, you're being circling the chopping block, just isn't fun. Anyway, yeah, I'll try some more later and such. Alright, should be back again. So, thinking about the fact that there's no free will isn't really news, because the word free will doesn't even mean anything, because free from what? If you were going to argue for some kind of will, it would be that we have an innately wise will or an innately intelligent will. But there's no point in having an innately free will, because that means you're free to think 1 + 1 is 15 or 11. Yeah. And you don't want that freedom. You want the freedom to have the wrong answer. You want to have the freedom to get right answers. And the argument is that there's nothing free about it, because everything is a confinement. Everything, your environment is never complete enough to create anything called freedom. It's just all some kind of cage, and that's all there are, and you can never get rid of all the cages of culture and parents, and every single influence binds you in some way. I was talking about that the other night. Just all the little quirks of our psychology, and how one event spoils you on something and you can't get over it for the rest of your life. It triggers you in some stupid way, and gives you the creeps, or whatever however you want to describe that. And it's just a brain function and a pattern, and you're stuck with it. You don't have any freedom to be unaffected. So it's just a silly concept. But the idea that there is something called determinism, or some kind of idea that we really are robots, and that we don't create ourselves. We can take credit for being something, but it doesn't really matter, because you didn't do it. The environment did it to you. It made you into who you are and what you are, and that's the truth of it. You don't have any oars. You don't have a rudder. You don't have any control features. It either occurs to you that something's a good idea, or it doesn't. You either see the light or you don't see the light. You either think white hat looks good, or you think black hat looks good. You just don't really have much choice in how you end up perceiving something or reacting to something. In that sense, it's because you already have to have some education or some experience that taught you a lesson, and therefore you don't do something stupid. But the only way you don't do the stupid thing is to know better not to do the stupid thing. There's no freedom to be wise without becoming wise. You just don't get to be wise for free. So anyway, I don't know if that's really the subject. I just wanted to throw it in there that it's not. It's kind of a science subject. It really isn't a philosophy subject, and it shouldn't be confused and argued as something else. So I think I will do a little drawing, and so it's a little bit of physics, but it's an idea about just how simple the underlying mechanism is. So in the last year or so, I've been using the statement that there's only one universe, and it's the little tiny one where the electrons and protons function, and that's it. And the rest of the universe is, the rest of this perception of a world are all distortions, because the only place that actually has rules and where things actually obey rules is that little tiny universe, and it's really controlling everything. But it doesn't have any brain beyond the ones synthesized out of its function, and that's it. But itself, the rules, there's nothing that made the rules, and there's nothing thoughtful that made the rules. Let's put it that way. So the simple analogy I'm using is that the universe is just made out of boulders and Sisyphuses. Okay, so that's it. So, and it really doesn't have to push them up hills. It just pushes them, period, in space. And so there's two kinds of siphicuses to go with the boulders, okay, red siphicuses and blue siphicuses. And the simple rule is that blue siphicuses, when they encounter a blue boulder, they stick to it unless it's coming towards them. That is, unless there's already a siphikus pushing it this way, then both siphicuses reflect. So as long as it's going the way the siphikus is moving, like if there's already two siphicuses pushing it, well, the third one will help push it, and they'll push it a little bit faster. It's still going to go slower than the natural speed of a siphikus. So I should just point out that the siphicuses, when free, they fly around at the speed of light. So that's the little bits of force in the universe. All the stuff moving the speed of light is these little things. And the simple rule is, like I said, the blue ones push the blue boulders, the red ones push the red boulders, and if a blue one tries to push on a red one, whoops, wrong color. If a blue one tries to push on a red boulder, he ends up popping out red, okay, and vice versa with the blue one. So if a red goes into a blue, he pops out blue. And with those simple rules, I mean, it can't get much simpler than that, right? So there's a sticking, a siphikus sticks to the boulder, the siphikus reflects, or the siphikus transitions, and that's it. So it's two kinds of force, two kinds of matter, two kinds of reactions, and that makes a perfect circumstance where the dislikes, okay, end up attracting very strongly, okay, because all the blue siphicuses that hit the red on this side turn red, so they just go right through the blue and turn red, so they don't push it. And vice versa, the red ones go right through the blue and turn blue, so they can't push on the red. So there's no pressure here, okay, in between them, nothing. And so they can't push apart. There's no force there. But there's plenty of blue siphicuses pushing out here this way, and there's plenty of reds out here pushing in, so obviously they attract strongly. And if I try to make two reds, you know, hit each other, obviously what happens is all the blue siphicuses are turning to red ones, and all the blues coming this way turn into red ones, and now obviously there's lots of pushing force. So now the pressure goes way up in between the two objects, pushes it apart. So you end up with a perfect description of Maxwell's charges, and charges can be really understood as just north and south. I mean, it's the same difference as the monopoles of magnetism. So you're making the first dipoles, essentially, and then you're off to the races. You just put a bunch of these things together, and you end up with eventually an atom that has electrons and protons in it. Okay, twice as many protons as electrons. Now they call when a proton is next to an electron, they call it a neutron, but it's just a proton next to an electron. And so you have a nucleus that's more positive than it is negative, okay, twice as positive as it is negative. And then the electrons just find a comfortable place out here where they're balanced against their repulsion against the electrons and their attraction to the protons. And now you're starting to make atoms. And then electrons don't swirl around the atom. The atom literally shares an electron. So if there was an electron here, this atom and this atom would share it literally, okay, in their real rigid positions. So that's how you build chemistry. And once you get chemistry, then you get DNA molecules. And once you get DNA molecules, you can have copying machines and make more and more machines at a very accelerated rate. You can make all kinds of innovations to the machines and such. Now, how probable it is that you're going to create this reproducing molecule? It's not that probable, and also it needs hardware to go with it. So at the same time you create this reproducing molecule, you need something to tear it apart, and then you need something to read the code that's on it. And so it needs other machines, chemistry machines, to be created at the same time. The DNA molecule by itself can't do the job. It needs something else to be a player in the construction of the making new products, new cells. Then you get into membranes and all kinds of stuff, and then nucleic cells. I mean, there's lots of rare and weird chemistry that has to happen before you get anywhere close to making a mammal, you know. And then once you have a mammal, it takes a while to get a brain that has the capacity to go to school and learn, because frankly you have to have the capacity before the school is built. So in a sense, evolution had to give us the ability to learn before we had any place to go to learn, that kind of thing. We had to have the function of language before we had a language to learn, which is another not likely step. And that's why only we have done it, you know, is because it wasn't something easy to do. Out of all the, I think there's probably billions of mammals that have existed, you know, we're the only ones that breached that boundary and became capable of storing information outside of our brains and taking 18 years to learn how to be a human. Anyway, so I just think it's a good context, and you don't have to believe this. I'm just saying that a simple model like this can describe all the functions. And again, these are the only players in the elemental universe. You don't need any other crap. You don't need muons and puons and zuons and all the other crap they've invented. You don't need antimatter. You don't need any kind of made up you know, nonsense particles. These create enough function to describe everything else that happens chemically and all of the thermodynamics. So it's a really simple universe. I mean, this whole idea gives you basically some capacity to just look at it and say, well, there is a difference between the Sisyphuses are flying free and when they're pushing boulders. And that is they're covering less distance. They're going a lower velocity. And so you could understand that if I made a bunch of Sisyphuses on this side of me push boulders, then the Sisyphuses coming this way would be able to push me because the Sisyphuses coming that way didn't get to be because they're busy pushing boulders. So I could move that way. And that's pretty much what's happening when you're falling in gravity. So it explains an awful lot. Alright, so that's the end of the physics. I'm just saying that to me it's an important context. I'm not saying, you know, for me, I always, you know, in high school, you know, even in grammar school, I was of the opinion that the universe had to have simple elemental substances. It had to be some simple mechanism that led to all of this crap. And so the stories they were telling, as soon as they got like something's doing this and this, you know, in space, I would say, how can it be doing that? Snakes are really complicated, you know, in terms of their muscular, you know, to be able to do that kind of crap. How the fuck does an elementary particle do it? I don't think it has muscles, and I don't think it has a capacity to do all of that nonsense. So it's not elemental was the point. Now, I don't think I was to the point where I knew it was all pushed, but I certainly knew that a lot of the pulls could be understood as pushes. I mean, I knew the doorknob one fairly early, you know, that you're not pulling on the door, you're pushing on the back of the doorknob, that kind of stuff. And I just think it's part of being able to reasonably understand the predicament we're in, is that, yeah, we're just a byproduct of a mechanical process. This thing just makes little tiny magnets. It makes little dipoles. That's all that's going on here in the universe. And they just pile up on each other, and as they pile up, they start to absorb more and more energy because the energy has to push all of the matter. And as they absorb it, like I said, it creates gravity, it creates other effects, and that's all you're doing here. You're just a machine that's been a byproduct of that process. That process is capable of making things get bigger and bigger and more complicated, and you're just a piece of complication. And you're not here for a purpose or to accomplish. And the fact is, the universe is without need. You don't. It doesn't need you to show up with your screwdriver and put a screw in or something. It doesn't need you to, be the Maytag repairman, and fix something. There's nothing to fix. The only thing that needs fixing is our own sentient condition, and the fact that we can't create societies and civilizations that are efficient enough. There's too much waste, too much pain, too much suffering thrown away gratuitously, and it's just way too expensive, and it's not your money. To continue that theme. Anyway, so I guess that's the core of making videos for me. Obviously, I started a little simpler because I knew there were these other subjects. So I talked about the right to die. I talked about democracy and how we need to get rid of the geographic bias. We're not possessions of a geography. We possess a philosophical perspective, and that's what should be represented in Congress, is each one of our philosophical perspectives, not our geography. Because basically all we're doing is having elections in all the states, and we just keep electing the same majority gets to elect all the representatives in every state, and all the minorities get nothing. In terms of all the minority philosophies have no representation. So I can use the cigarettes thing as an example. It's because most people didn't smoke, and they just said, well, let's just tax the fuck out of cigarette smokers to pay our bills. It was just an easy target because it's a minority, and you could exploit them because they don't have a congressman. I mean, there's no state that's 90% cigarette smokers, so they don't get to win any elections. They don't get to have any political power. And so then you can just run over their rights, and that's all the selfish majority did, was basically said, we're just going to exploit this vice. So instead of picking on fat people, they decided to pick on smokers. It's just bullshit. And it only happened because there was more fat people than smokers. Anyway, so these are all little things, okay? So they're all the small subjects, and then one day I just decided, well, why talk about all the small subjects when we really should just get to the big subject, which is there's way too much dying, death, disease, torment, suffering, anguish, horror in nature. It's way too expensive. Way too many kittens are killed to make cats. So until you get the number of the dead kittens, you gotta make that pile much smaller to have any hope of justifying it. And even if you were to use humans as an example, I could never justify imposing torture on somebody else to defend my existence. That is being a vampire. And so until you make it almost free, costless, until you really, really reduce the price, you have no business imposing being a vampire on people. It's an evil thing to do. Yeah. So, yeah, that's probably enough. All right. So, don't know if I should mention it. So I think, should I mention it? I might do a live room, just where I sit in the room and just take the shit that you put in a chat or something, and sort of make some argument like this, where I'll claim that there's no God or there's no something, and then morons will try to defend some wacky theory that there's some point in something, or whatever would happen. So just because it is doable, so I should be able to do it. So maybe this week I'll do that. Who knows? Maybe later. But yeah, I doubt it. Say, if there was a real argument, if somebody could actually write a reasonable argument defending the existence of life on Earth as if it somehow is profitable, that would be an interesting read. But I've seen nothing where anybody can use anything called logic and reasoning and then defend the existence of this meat grinder torture machine thing. That it's somehow worth it. That we're worth giving kids cancer, or we're worth a bunch of dead kittens, or we're worth baby elephants getting eaten by lions. We're not worth it. We're not doing anything that needs to be done. We're just making a mess and barely cleaning up any of it. Alright. So yeah, I'll call that a video then. Probably should have gotten rid of that. Oh, there's me. Years ago. Yeah. Before the horrors of aging took over. Ew. Ew. It really is. There's just nothing good about getting old. It just sucks. You know, frankly. You know. It does suck. Alright, anyway, so till the next time, and such, and so forth, and whatnot. Yeah, that's enough. Till next time. Yeah, who knows? Who knows what next time will be? I don't know yet. The universe hasn't calculated it out yet, so I can't see where it's heading. You know, where am I heading? I can't see that yet. I need to get closer to next week to see it. Can't see it yet.